Hello, we're rolling into another episode of the DRH show. As usual, in each episode, I'll be talking to interesting people within psychology, mental health, and well-being. My brilliant guest for today is a transgender activist, and she's also the founder of Talk to the Rainbow. Tara Fraser, thanks for joining me.
Hello, thanks for inviting me.
Okay, it's a pleasure to have you here, Tara. I've always wanted to talk to you, but I suppose let's just start off with you telling us your background, your trajectory in life, and how you ended up launching Talk to the Rainbow.
All right, okay. So where do I start? I was born. So I still am. So I started as a structural engineer. When I started my career path, I was a structural engineer. Still am, still doing that day to day. But the process of me transitioning meant that I was in quite a fragile mental health state at the time. When I hit my 40s, I kind of fell apart. And part of that process for me was not just dealing with the kind of medical process that you get put through for transition, but I actually sought out therapy as well. And so I worked with a therapist, which just recently finished after almost 8 years. So I've been in therapy for 8 years, and part of that process was to kind of find myself, really. And that's beyond just the trans part. That's actually finding self. That's about finding who I am, really, and where I belong. And that's kind of truest sense of the meaning, being with others in relationship, really. You know, so in that process, I kind of decided that I would venture into becoming a counsellor, or I went on the foundation year and was just blown away by the fact that I could be open and honest with other human beings. I'll never forget the first session where we all sat around a huge room. There was 23, 24 of us. And so we all had to introduce ourselves. They all went one way and we all introduced our names. And then it got to the end and the tutor went, well, has that always been your name? And if not, what was it beforehand? And of course, trans, that's like, brings up all that idea of what a dead name is and how that feels to actually be that honest about your past. And that kind of sums up the process of becoming a counsellor, really, having to kind of go back through my past and kind of put it to right, not maybe put it right, but just recognise what it is in my life, you know? And so that kind of set my pathway to becoming a counsellor. So I chose to do the psychotherapeutic counselling course. I just submitted all my final dissertation, all the paperwork a few weeks back. So
congratulations.
Get positive feedback. So at the moment, technically, I am still a trainee psychotherapist. A psychotherapeutic counsellor, not psychotherapist, sorry. And in that process, I've been now working for 3 years voluntarily with a SWAN project where it's dealing with alcohol and drugs. And then after a year of that, I also then worked at Bristol Mind in the LGBTQ team, working with people in the GSRD, gender, sexual, relational diversity. So, and that's been really a wonderful place to be honest, to be able to kind of help people kind of figure out who they are, you know, and not be kind of duty bound by, and allow people to talk about things they're scared to talk to the GP about or talk to the gender specialist about, but actually just have that space to be themselves and open up about, really. So that's where I am. I'm kind of just to that process, and Talk to the Rainbow is a kind of offshoot of several people's experience of the training process, of it not being quite, it touches diversity, but maybe not to the depth of being seen as someone that's different. And then it's kind of is client work, you know, working with people like gay, lesbian, bi, trans, queer, you know, that's what I see. And so to find someone that's a supervisor for that, it's been quite hard work. So, you know, and do that. And then client, you know, I know myself from my own experience that to find a counsellor, I had to find someone that I could truly trust. And I felt unless they were part of that community, I would never be able to walk in. And now I guess I could walk into any therapy space. But at that start, at that beginning, I needed to know that someone would understand the language that I was going to be using.
So it's basically your lived experience as a transgender, which prompted you to co-found Talk to the Rainbow. Now, I just used one of the words that I always want to be enlightened about. I just used the word transgender. So I suppose, Tara, if you could just help us differentiate what is a transgender, what is a transsexual, and is it wrong to use one term over the other?
I know when you said that, my response in myself was well, that's kind of the umbrella term. It kind of captures anyone that's kind of outside the kind of binary construct of male and female. But for me, it's kind of, you know, it took me a long time to be able to say that I was a transsexual. And that's kind of where and it's kind of, I guess I kind of think of myself as a woman with a transsexual past because I've gone through the process now. I've transitioned, I've moved on, you know. But it's quite interesting, I guess, as a therapist, I continue to kind of experience that and deal with that because that's what my work is as a therapist as well, in some sense. So transgender is a kind of umbrella term. And I think that's what confuses people because then it's like everyone gets lumped together and there's just so much diversity within that umbrella group.
But you would personally prefer to be identified as a transgender. Am I right in saying that?
No, I think no, because I think it's too generic for me personally. I think it's too generic. It's kind of doesn't represent where I am on that spectrum. If you like, transgender is that spectrum, and I feel you know, I've experienced different parts of that world, but you know, I've arrived at accepting who I am, dealing with who I am, and knowing who I am, and gone through that whole process. You know, I might sit under that umbrella, but I'm transsexual.
Okay,
you know?
I see. Okay, I apologize if I used the wrong term earlier, so you'd rather be identified as a transsexual. Now, Tara, you briefly mentioned about... Sorry?
I'm just Tara. I mean, that's the thing.
Tara. Okay.
You know, we're all human beings.
Yeah. Okay. So, Tara, I just... you just briefly mentioned about your experience of transitioning. If you could just... I suppose highlight what are the challenges and what are the positive aspects of transitioning. Earlier you alluded to that it kind of generate, you know, identifying who you are. So other than that, what are the positive aspects of transitioning?
So it's really hard. I mean, but the fact is that, so for me, I had to get to a position where I was falling apart before I was able to kind of deal with it. And I guess I'm slightly of that middle-aged generation that didn't think they could possibly do it, didn't think it was possible. And I kind of went to my GP, who told me that there was no money in the kitty for it, and kind of thought, sod you. So I booked myself into a specialist in Harley Street and went and saw them and followed that pathway, to be honest, rather than the NHS, because I guess for me, I didn't want, you know, I've got friends who've gone through the NHS process and it's very much number orientated, very much treated like an object. I guess my experience has been very much being treated like a person, you know, and I realized that comes with a set level of privilege of having money at that time, of being able to afford that, you know, and I recognize that at the moment there's a lot of people having to do that. Either their families or themselves are having to do that because the NHS waiting list have got just so horrendous now that people are, you know, self-harming, trying to commit suicide. The kind of mental health aspect of having to wait is just horrendous. So that's the bit I kind of recognized at the beginning. And then the process itself was very much, I went with how I felt. And I always was honest with the specialist I came up with. or met, kind of said how I felt, didn't try and hide anything. And the process was about, not just about me, but it was about allowing my younger children at the time to understand. I just had separated from my partner, you know, and there was dealing with work, there was dealing with my family, you know, there's all those sorts of things going on because we don't just live on our own, we live within a community, you know, like telling my neighbors, you know, I used to dog train, so telling all the people I dog trained with, you know, just that whole thing. It's all about, and then there comes a point where you start telling one person at a time and you get more confident at it. And then it kind of just goes out. You lose control of it. You have to kind of accept that it's beyond your control. You know, I still remember my work, tell my work. I remember that first day. I'll never forget it after the May Day holiday. And it was just going in and feeling quite fearful of what was going to happen that day. And actually, after about the first hour and a half, I was just back at work again. Okay, in different clothes. And some people couldn't cope with it. And a lot of people did cope with it quite well. You know, the ones that didn't cope with it, they just took time. You know, you have to give people sometimes space and time for them to process. Because I think what I recognize is some people feel like you've lied to them, that you've not been honest with them. They've known you as this other person for 5-6 years, and then all of a sudden you're something else, and it's like being betrayed, really. You know, so you've got to give people space. You know, and when people got pronouns wrong or anything else, it was just, I think I used humor, you know, and rather than trying to clobber people, I kind of used humor. Try to win people over rather than to beat them over the head with it, really. Because in all truth, you know, in the space I was in, engineering, you know, it transpires that most engineers are just interested in doing engineering. The rest of the things in the world it's just about what you do. And what I found was my boss had wanted me to take me away from working with certain clients because he felt that it might be too much. So I actually talked to my clients, and several of them wrote letters to my director to tell them that if they, in no certain circumstances, should I be taken off the project, because it didn't matter. It was all about what I was doing as a person. It wasn't anything about my gender. And that was really nice, really. So I went through that process. I got signed off by the specialist in Harley Street, got signed off by the other person, and I went into the waiting list to go to Brighton. And once again, it's kind of a process of waiting, to be honest. And I kind of recognize that process going from one to the other, there's lots of nice parts to it, but it's hard as well, because I think there's quite a level of impatience in oneself to kind of get to the end. But you've kind of got to go through the process to appreciate it as well sometimes, you know. And, you know, I had surgery. I was fortunate enough to be able to get 3 months off work. I went back to work. And then after about a year, I left and joined a small engineering practice that I now own. So that's kind of, you know, and my kids have all been through the process with me. They still all call me dad. That's their choice. That was kind of, I've never forced them into using pronouns or terms that they feel uncomfortable with. But as they've grown older, they change. It's really interesting. So we go shopping, and my daughter will quite happily do Tara. You know, it's just that she's kind of recognized social circumstances require different terms, you know, and I kind of allow them. And, you know, my changes force them to have to see the world from a different perspective. Not a bad perspective, but they kind of have to understand there is difference in the world.
So I think basically what you're saying is all about respecting people in relation to the identity, in relation to the experiences. And I suppose what I want to ask you this time, because you kind of mentioned this already, you know, trying to use the pronouns that people prefer. And a lot of times we often hear people talking about non-binary. So if you could just touch upon that, what exactly do we mean by non-binary?
Oh, It's kind of like, I guess my experience of it has been that people hold it in different ways. The clients I've worked with hold it in different ways. And so you can think of, there's the most basic way we thought of things is because of the Industrial Revolution, we've kind of had these two boxes where we take male or female, and that's where we started, and then you can kind of think of it as a continuum where you've got a kind of male to female line, where you can sit along that line. And then there's another way to think of it as kind of like pizza, which is like you've got maleness, femaleness, and otherness sat within us. And so it kind of fluctuates depending on what we do and what day of the week it is. And it's not a kind of static thing. And so some people, I guess some people I've met have kind of said, well, I kind of feel different in different circumstances. I don't feel male and I don't feel female, so therefore I'm kind of non-binary or queer or question, and and that's just how they are, and that's kind of, I think the government's missed an opportunity because they just rejected recently the non-binary option in passports, and I think it would have resolved quite a lot of issues with regards to identity, and I think the bit I noticed the most is, well, there's all this politics going on. Intersection people that they're intersexual, where do they sit in this whole thing? They've never been recognized. No one's given them a voice, and that's just who they are, and when they're born, they're historically someone's had to make a choice between male or female, and actually, good practice is you allow someone to find out who they are with time. Bad practice has been someone is forced into a gender without consideration of what the child is in that space, But the non-binary is it's almost like rejecting the kind of strict guidance that male and femaleness is, and kind of recognizing there's a world between that. And I think most people fit in some sort of spectrum. I don't think there's a pure masculinity and pure femininity. We all kind of flex in that world.
And to you, as a transsexual, what's the need for allowing people to self-identify which identity they prefer? You just mentioned about passport. Apparently, the government do not think that it is important. So, what's your take on that? What's the need for self-identification?
Well, when you see self-identification, you're still committed. I mean, the fact is that it's not just a kind of waking up in the morning and going, I'm going to be this. There's still going to have a legal part to it. Other countries in Europe have already set this up and had no issues around self-identification. It's like changing your name, there's this whole thing going on where people are kind of running around, kind of saying, oh, someone will change their gender just to do this. And the fact is that gender is such a personal thing to each individual. I don't think there'd be very many people wanting to change gender unless you've got that sense of not belonging. Most people don't even think about gender. Most people live their life without ever questioning their gender. So if you question your gender, there's something different. There's something you kind of need to explore. And, when what's wrong with kind of identifying yourself as, where you need to be.
And obviously,
it's not hurting anyone. It's not hurting anyone. It's not, people will need to live their genuine lives. And I think in 100-year time, beyond my lifetime, I think this will not be an issue anymore. It'll just be the way people are.
That people can just choose whatever gender they are more comfortable with. Now, obviously, this is a very polarized topic. It divides people, it divides policies, it divides the government. So how do you think we can have a more civilized and healthy debate towards transgenderism, towards transsexuals?
I think you've got a lot of media at the moment that kind of see it as a way of selling print. you know. And if I think you've got to look at anything that's written and kind of think, if I were to swap out the word trans or transsexual with, you know, with someone that's Asian, say, or someone that's black, or someone that's Jewish, and if it doesn't read comfortably, why are you writing it? You know, you've got to kind of be aware of what you're writing, you know, and what, you know, and papers are, you know, they're there to sensationalize. So is the news, you know, the media is a circus, you know, it's there to sell something. It's to sell time, space, it makes money. And so at the moment, we're quite low in the totem pole, I guess, and we're kind of easy to target. But once if they destroy, you know, they will move on to someone else. You know, whatever happens, when this becomes no longer an issue, it'll be someone else will be under attack next. Mm-hmm. You know, this othering process that we deal with in this world of, you know, I'm this, therefore you're that. You know, this is kind of, it's such a polarizing effect because it means I'm okay, you're not okay, and it just isn't acceptable. I think people have to start thinking about what other people feel and are. Mm-hmm. You know.
So you think that soon it will just take its natural course, that it will become acceptable? I think you raised an important thing here earlier, because you said that, you know, at one point people will just be comfortable with people telling that they're actually trans, in the same way that, you know, at one point during the 60s and 70s, it's not really acceptable if you come out as gay, but being a trans, you think it kind of, you know, going through that phase.
Well, I'm phase. I'm not sure if I like that word, but I think.
What I mean by phase is that I mean the societal phase. You know, like at one point as a society, we have gone through a phase where we're not really tolerant about people coming out as gay, but now we already have come as a society in this phase that we no longer care if someone comes out as gay. So, but essentially what I'm saying is that maybe at some point, trans people will also reach that stage, that the societal phase where it's not really.
Yeah, I think so. I think so, but I think as someone that's tracked, you know, in that spectrum, I think the issue we've got at the moment is that as long as we try and argue for our rights with the people that are arguing against us, whatever term they want to use, I'm not going to use any of the short terms. That we need our friends and colleagues to stand up for us, because actually, as long as we argue with them, it doesn't get anywhere. Because actually, people that want to argue with us, it's like pigs in mud. Really, they're enjoying it because that's what they want to do. You know, it's when. So I think the really powerful thing was London Pride, when the people stood in front of the Pride, the anti-trans people stood in front. Actually, all the gay people and lesbians that came out against that, that's where the strength and power comes from. It comes from other people recognizing that we do exist in that sort of sense. You know, because as long, you know, we know who we are, but we need the rest of the society to understand. And because we're such a, you know, we are a small percentage of the population, you know, less than 1% of the population, you know. So it's just that whole process, really. We need our fellow human beings to understand who we are, you know, and then, you know, give us a human face and not just an object.
Okay. Now, another interesting issue about the rights, you said about the rights, is that, you know, the Olympic Games they're starting to allow transgender women to compete in sports which are traditionally for women, and this is provoking a heated debate about inclusion and fairness. So, for you, Tara, how do you think we should address this issue?
I don't watch sport. I think there might be a reason why. And the sports I have taken part in have never had that kind of gender bias in them. So, you know, I kind of, you know, the fact is that at the moment, you know, they're still going through the process where some women, you know, naturally born women are being told that they've got too much testosterone in their body. You know, we haven't even, you know, and to think of someone wanting to transition to gain benefit in a sport is just bonkers. It is absolutely bonkers. No one would do this to gain an advantage at a sporting level. And the fact is that if you can transition and achieve some sporting, I mean, that's pretty amazing, to be honest, because you know, to get to the top end of your sport and deal with being in transition phase is just, I mean, that's an awful lot to put on your plate, you know? And so, yeah, you know, I think they just need to kind of think about it, really. I mean, I recognize from, you know, after, you know, I've been post-surgery for however many years now, and, you know, you lose strength, you know. Okay, I've still got the physicality of someone that's 6'2", but I haven't got the strength I used to have. You know, I recognize that, you know. I'm too old to compete at Olympics, so it's irrelevant. But I guess what we kind of need to kind of think about in the future is how people actually compete, because there is discrepancy in all sports, you know. The fact that we've got, you know, even to compete at swimming level, I think swimming's quite particular at this at the moment. There is no option for trans people competing in swimming at the moment, as I understand. But different sports have got, so different sporting bodies have got different attitudes towards it, shall we say.
And Tara, sorry, do you want more to add more on that?
No, it's all right. Okay, that's fine. It's not really my specialty subject, I'll be honest.
Okay, so Tara, are you optimistic for 2020? Do you think that there will be changes within the discourse of transgender and transsexual people?
No, not at the moment. I think we're kind of in. I think it's quite sad that we've got different parts of the UK doing different things. So we had the UK government, London, kind of ignoring the issue, kind of talking about it and then putting it away. And then we've got the Scottish government that are doing their own thing, you know, and they've kind of gone out and I suspect what will happen is they'll get embarrassed by some other part of the UK. I suspect Scotland will form something and it'll happen that way. It won't happen as a unified front. We've got a country where Northern Ireland is just, you know, is just so far behind the times, you know. We can see that just by the fact that gay men have, you know, and lesbians have only been given equality in marriage recently. You know, we're kind of talking about, we haven't got equality around the UK, you know. And so 2020, I think, still a lot of fighting to be done. There's still a lot of, you know, if you go into the wild, wild west of Twitter, you know, and all the rest of it, it is just brutal. You know, there's some really horrible people out there, both sides of the fence. You know, there's quite extremist views on both sides, and I think
I agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just, and I guess as a therapist, I'm just really interested that you can't have two sides listen and understand the other. No one's willing to listen and understand the other. You know, the fact is that, you know, there are fears on both sides and all the rest of it, but no one's willing to kind of create, you know, and I think a lot of people are in the middle ground and kind of just getting on with their lives, but there's this kind of extremist in both sides. And I think that's what the public say. I think that's the danger we've got, that extremist element. Both sides of that fence are kind of, because they're the ones that shout loudest.
And these extreme views about this issue, is this what you're trying, also what you're trying to achieve at Talk to the Rainbow, just offer a more nuanced conversation about transgender and about transsexual?
So Talk to the Rainbow, we're talking about gender, sexuality, relational diversity, and so we're just dealing with people that are struggling. You know, we're dealing with the people that are kind of, the world's not quite the place they expect it to, but they're not quite fitting in. They don't understand why they're not fitting in. They want to kind of talk through, understand what's going on in their life, you know, and actually become more them, you know, whatever that is, and explore that in a kind of open and safe environment where there is no judgment, there's just space, you know. And I think that's the important part. There's space for someone to not be judged and kind of, you know, explore, you know, because someone might come in kind of with expectations of one thing and leave with the other by the time they've kind of been able to have that kind of honest conversation. You know, not everyone's going to come in and kind of, I'm this, I'm definitely this, and then walk out going, I am this, you know, and some people are. And it just, you know, I guess my experience has been that because we talk about it in society, there is nowhere to talk about it because families don't talk about it because you're scared to talk to your family because then you out yourself to your family. You're scared to talk to your friendship group because friends have that concept of who you are as a person, and they don't want to lose that concept. So they'll say what they think they want to say and maybe what they think you are. So as a therapist, we don't offer that level of opinion. We are there as a kind of we form that kind of safe container for someone to kind of spill out into and explore, really.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Tara, I understand that you're still working well with this in this lockdown. So what are the future plans for Talk to the Rainbow? Do you have any upcoming events, or do you have any, you know, like drop-in sessions?
So the future at the moment is, so we're having to do a lot of stuff online, Zoom, and we've also got we would like to start setting up a dance therapy group in Bristol, which we feel would be quite an empowering way for people to meet and communicate with each other. But with the lockdown, that's going to be slightly hard until we get past probably the next 18 months, unfortunately. We're wondering about whether we can do that in a kind of Zoom room or something in the future. We're going to kind of explore that. We are kind of hoping that we can find premises in Bristol at some point in time that we can use. And we've started developing podcasts. We just finished a podcast hopefully about mindfulness. And so hopefully each member of the group can have a kind of session where we can talk about them and aspirations and what they bring into the group, really, so people can then see who the therapist might be. You know, imagine what it might be like to be in the room with that other person.
Mm-hmm. And this podcast, is this available? Sorry.
It'll be available in the next few weeks. So we just did it today. We've got to learn how to top and tail it, and we're going to put it on our website. So it'll be on talktotherainbow.co.uk on our blog and post there.
Okay, brilliant. So I'll post that link on the description box, so those people who are interested more to learn about your work can visit your website. Well, Tara, it's been an insightful conversation with you. I'm really grateful for the time that you've given to me. Thank you for sharing your expertise as well, and I look forward to hearing more about your work.